Hello and welcome to another edition of the Front Page. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal, and today it's my pleasure to have with me two distinguished guests to talk about a subject of, I guess it's fair to say, long-running interest in Manchester, but one that may be peaking again. And that, of course, is the issue of the roundabout and so-called malfunction junction, corner of Main Street and Depot Street. And today with me to talk a little bit about the roundabout and its history and how we got to where we are, we have Mr. Ron Mancini, who's the chairman of the Transportation Initiative Committee, or the TIC Committee as it's probably more frequently referred to, and also Lee Krohn, who's the planning director and zoning administrator from the town of Manchester. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Andy.
Thanks.
Well, Lee, let me start off with you. Can you give us a bit of an overview about this whole project? Now, as we know, we're nearing the final stages, we think, of this project. Maybe not. I guess we've been nearing the final stages several times before. But what exactly is involved with the roundabout? I mean, most of us probably think of it as a kind of the big traffic circle in the center of the intersection there. But there's really more to it than that. I think it's actually three elements altogether, between a sewer line project, water line project, burying of some power lines and telephone cables, along with the traffic rotary. But maybe you can walk us through exactly what's going on with the roundabout.
Sure, thanks. Well, certainly then Ron will give more history on this. What began as an intersection project has really turned into a more full-featured downtown improvement project. By way of orientation, coming up Route 1130 to Center Bridge to the intersection, Main Street heading south from the junction, heading north toward historic Main Street, and heading up Bonnet Street. So in its simplest incarnation, it involves a road project where we will convert this T intersection into a roundabout to help keep the traffic moving smoothly. And then at Bonnet Street will be basically a little bump in the road, a mini roundabout, as is commonly used in Europe, to help, again, keep traffic flowing smoothly through this shared combination of intersections. As this project evolved, we realized there were other key elements of municipal infrastructure that also need to be repaired or replaced. And so rather than dig up the downtown on multiple occasions, we wanted to integrate these for everyone's benefit, dig things up once and get it done for a lifetime. So there's a stretch of sewer line coming across the road now that needs actually along the bridge. That will be replaced as part of the project. There's a stretch of sewer line coming down toward the Sirloin Saloon deep in the road that needs to be replaced. So it makes sense for us to do that as part of the project. Again, dig things up once, get it done. It will also cost the taxpayers less to integrate that into the road project than to have to do it separately. We also have a stretch of 100-year-old water line running from Bonnet Street up to Memorial Avenue where the school is, and that will be replaced as a part of this project as well. Again, integrating that into the roadway project so it's more efficient and effective in terms of construction. Along with that, and has been discussed at several town meetings, is the notion of relocating or burying overhead utility lines and really beautifying the center of town. Right now there's a constellation of poles, power lines, crisscrossing this whole part of the downtown. So actually before roadway construction begins, we'll be removing the overhead poles in front of the town green up to the intersection and rerouting those lines up Cottage Street and out Wyman Lane so that they're out of the main public view. There's a very large power pole on Land of Hand. That goes away as well, along with some of the poles in this immediate neighborhood. And what we'll be doing then is going underground through Ed Morrow's driveway and coming through the Northshire Bookstore property and underground through the Hand Motors property and hooking back up with the link in the vicinity of the gas station. So we clean up the power lines and poles throughout that whole part of the intersection. So Phase 2 will get rid of lines and poles along historic Main Street as well, and we're still seeking the funding to help that happen. And in that case, we'd be running power lines behind the properties on this end of Main Street and coming across from the town green across the river and back up the old Main Street behind what used to be the Quality Restaurant and hooking back up with Main Street.
So all three of those pieces, the power lines, the water lines, and the traffic circle, sort of have to fit together in terms of the construction or when they all are going to be built?
It all becomes a more complex scheduling process, but in terms of really making this a very special place for those of us who live here and the visitors who come to visit here. We really wanted to focus energy and reinvestment in the core. This also involves significant reconstruction of sidewalks throughout this entire project area. So it's not just, again, where it began as a roadway project, but a thorough rehabilitation and reinvestment in the core.
Okay.
We put a lot of effort and emphasis on design details for crosswalks, sidewalks, bridge railings and abutments, and historic style streetlights as well.
Okay. Well, Ron, let me turn to you. How did we get here? I mean, this has been a long-running project, as anyone who's lived in Manchester for the last 15 or 20 years knows. It's been through many permutations and different ideas have been floated. Can you give us a background from your perspective on the TIC committee as to how we wound up with this particular design instead of something else?
Well, the way we ended up with this design was basically through a consensus process where the community participated all the way through. The committee was actually formed back in 1992, and it was actually formed to take advantage of a change in federal thinking as to how transportation projects should be developed. Up until the first, from 1950s on forward, transportation projects were top-driven, like the interstate highway system. And communities didn't really have much of a say in how these projects impacted their communities. And then there was, the federal government passed a law that put monies through the transportation budget funneled out to communities and to states so that they can develop projects locally that would impact them in a positive way and would enjoy federal funding. So it was kind of a reversal, a turning over of the government's point of view as to how transportation projects should be managed. So once we were aware of that as a community, the select board, we approached the select board and suggested a transportation initiative committee, which they approved, that would look at a comprehensive overview of the town of Manchester and all of the transportation infrastructure, whether it was pedestrian, bicycle paths, roadway improvements, traffic mitigation, because we had gone through a significant period from the 60s actually through the 80s with a drop in the economy in the 70s, where, it was in the 60s where malfunction junction kind of got its name. And so we were able to hire engineers through the Bennington County Regional Commission. There was what's called a carve-out, where money was devoted just to studying Manchester and prioritizing for us where we should invest our time and our energy. And what came out of that process was really paying attention to the junction for public safety, pedestrian safety, just a friendliness of the town, eliminate the confusion, eliminate the level of service that the junction was, had impacted. It was a level of service F for 700-800 hours a year. And not only that, it was just a challenge for residents and visitors to negotiate, and it has been all this time. So once that was done, the committee then started to focus on downtown transportation infrastructure. In the meantime, other things were going on. Because of the committee's activity in transportation infrastructure, when there was money available for sidewalks to be built from downtown to the town offices, because we had an active committee, we were able to shepherd that process through. So there were other things going on that didn't have to do specifically with managing the junction. But the junction project went through a series of, from 1994 through 2001, went through a lot of engineering, a lot of design considerations. The public was involved in every step of the way. Alternatives were put out. Ended up with 7 to 9 alternatives that were from a do-nothing alternative to a four-way intersection to stoplights, and all of these things were explored through the public process. And engineers would give us their overview as to what level of service we could accomplish, what the cost and benefits would be of each one. until ultimately the roundabout, and actually the double roundabout solution, is what the community decided was really in the best interests. And then from there, we went into a more broader view. Well, it's rather than just focus on the intersection, as Lee pointed out, why not make this a comprehensive downtown improvement project? Because while the engineers were working on coming up with solutions and doing their studies, the committee had about a 10 to 12 month period where this work was being done, and we decided in order to remain active, we felt that one of the big challenges that we had as a community was mitigating the polarization that had occurred through our very intensive growth period of the 80s. Non-growth people versus growth people, neighbors arguing with each other. And we felt that as a committee, and since we were a committee that represented all constituencies, we had Cottage Street people on it, we had that were felt that were impacted by the development of the 80s. We had downtown business people. It was a broad range. We had government people on it, select board members, planning commission members. And we felt that if we could be an example to how the community would behave, if we could be a consensus-based committee and then share that experience with the community at large, then we had a better chance of succeeding at coming up with a solution that everyone could live with. So in that interim, we took it upon ourselves to take the community through a visioning process. And for every week, we would invite 10 or 12 people from the community, and this went for months, where and people that were actually sat at the table that had opposing points of view, and collected information from them as to what their vision was for Manchester. And as a result of that, we were able to draft a document from all of those 250 people that participated. And we went through 8 drafts. The Journal published a couple of them. We did mailings, we did surveys, until we finally came up with a vision statement that everyone said, this works. And it became the preamble to our town plan. And a lot of the zoning, the thinking that's gone into zoning and town planning has been based upon that vision statement. We're probably at a point now where we should be revisiting the vision statement for the next 20 to 40 years. But in the meantime, the need to have a town that continued its destination resort status, was safe for the community, was welcoming, was all very important parts of the vision statement. And from that, we were able to take the community through the alternatives and have the community give us feedback on these alternatives until they were narrowed down to this one, which was then approved at town meeting. And then ever since then, we've been doing the background work, because even though this was approved several years ago, once the concept was approved, then the real work of design came into play. So the committee spent about a year and a half just working with engineers on bridge design, what the pavers would look like, what the color of the roundabout would be, whether we could, when we negotiated for granite facings on the bridge and an aesthetic pleasing environment, rather than octopus light poles. We negotiated for light poles that were keeping with the feel of a Vermont town. So all of that work was going on at that time.
Well, let me just jump in there and just ask, one of the questions I've heard is why not just go with a much simpler approach, like a traffic light or a policeman directing traffic? Why were those two options, for instance, shot down and dismissed in favor of what we've come up with? I mean, that on its face, that would seem like a lower cost, simpler kind of way of resolving the traffic problem.
Well, and they may be lower cost, but they have their own challenges associated with them. The analysis was both, as Ron mentioned, engineering-based and community consensus-based. We've had traffic lights there, and they were an utter failure. And yes, there are newer generations of lights with sensors and all of that, but every engineering firm that's ever looked at traffic lights for this pair of intersections has independently concluded that it would be an utter failure. The reason is twofold. One is that anytime you start stopping traffic from moving on a main street, you create its own form of congestion. The other challenge is the double offset of left-turning movements. And so if you stop the traffic here at the junction, it very quickly locks up Bonnet Street and Main Street. So it starts to multiply the negative effects of stopping and starting the traffic. witness the traffic lights we have at the base of Richville Road, which is a functionally fairly similar pair of opposed intersections, only the other direction. And when the traffic is the heaviest, what do? We turn the lights to flashing because they don't work to keep it moving. The advantage of a roundabout is that it keeps the traffic moving, even in its heaviest flow times. You don't have the air pollution in the downtown associated with idling cars sitting, going nowhere. You don't have the maintenance and the power costs of the traffic lights. Similarly, with the traffic control, sheriffs or police officers, it tended to make things worse than better. We had experience with that. There are development projects that had that as conditions, requiring developers to pay the costs, and we stopped using it because it made things worse than better. The advantage here is that we have an opportunity to fix things for the long run. So rather than take a lower cost, simpler solution that might help at times in the short run, we're really trying to do this right, do it once for the long haul. Because traffic may be less today, but it will increase again. And let's plan for the future. Let's take this opportunity to do things right and incorporate a host of other improvements to the historic part of the downtown.
Well, as you both know, I'm sure, one of the concerns that's been voiced is the fact that we're going to have the center of town torn up in some way or another for the better part of 2 years, and that will cause some congestion and whatnot, even more so than what we have now. I know there's been some discussion about night construction and trying to devise ways of ensuring that the traffic will still flow through that intersection relatively smoothly. I wonder if both of you could talk to that a little bit. Is it going to be a real traffic nightmare once construction begins at some point in a year or two or whenever? And maybe before we're done, it'd be interesting to hear kind of what the timeline is. But I mean, how bad will that be for merchants and motorists in that intersection?
Well, I think before we even get into that, because there will be inconvenience, there's no way we can avoid that. I'd like to compare what we're doing with this project with the widening of Route 11 and 30 back in the 80s. In the 80s, the state came along and said, we are going to do this. They gave us very little say over the matter. We had no options in terms of timing or what have you. And we ended up with no one being happy about the inconvenience, the dust, the whole idea of that. And the fact that it was out of our control was very, very frustrating to the businesses on 11 and 30 and the community at large. With that experience in hand, we had the opportunity, and we approached the select board with the opportunity to have this be a locally managed project. The difference between a state-run project and a locally managed project, first of all, we have the power to do that because we have good town management. We've got, and Lee Krohn, we've got people that, from the town's perspective, can really have a sense as to how to oversee a project like this. The other aspect of it is the TIC committee is a volunteer citizen committee. And our role going forward from now that the design work has been done is to make sure that the project is managed locally and have an ear towards what the community's needs are, and work with contractors that we hire, with public relations firms that we hire, so we have more control over how this is being done. During the design and pre-construction phases, the TIC committee spent about 6 months with engineers on the sequencing of the project. We have certain restrictions. For instance, we can't be in the riverbed too early in the year because of Agency of Natural Resources restrictions on the waterway, which we must honor, of course. But the idea was to just do this project and just go for it. And we're talking about construction at low periods of time, minimize construction at peak periods of time. Timing has been a very essential thing. And we've asked the engineers in their timelines to keep going back and taking these things into account. And the fact that there were business people, Main Street business people, like the Hands and the Morrows, that were involved in that process, I think we've ended up with a project that really respects that.
So traffic will be flowing through the intersection more or less normally, do you think? Or how badly will that be affected?
our goal was to keep 2 lanes of traffic through the intersection at all times.
Okay.
And you have to realize too that a lot of the construction at the roundabout site will not be in the roadway. It'll actually on what is now town property, but was the hand property. Lee, you want to go into that?
Sure. A couple of key things there. That the road as we know it is here now. So there's a whole new portion of bridge that gets constructed into what we know as the Hand Motors property. So all of that work that is involved in constructing this other half of the roundabout will happen out of the roadway. The other thing is that we have authority from the state to go to bid for this for night work. And so the goal is the construction can happen at night, restore to the best extent possible free flow of traffic during the day. Again, clearly there's going to be some level of inconvenience there, but you can imagine how much more efficient it is for the contractors to do the work at night when there's very, very little traffic flowing through town. So they don't have to stop every 2 minutes to let cars by. They can work more efficiently and less disruption to residents and visitors. Our engineer tells us we can shave 6 months off the length of time for the construction by doing night work because it's that much more efficient. The other piece of this is that we got the night work, you've got the work out of the road, and again, because it's locally managed, we'll have a lot more control over information flow and how well we can keep everyone informed of what's happening and when. And we have some built-in helpful roundabouts themselves, so we can use Wyman Lane and Cottage Street as a de facto end run around. If there's key work in the intersection, we can route cars around that at night and just let that road work happen without interruption. Same thing, we'll have to reopen Memorial Avenue and School Street to two-way traffic so that folks can get around there. But it's very important to us that we make sure the message is out there both for the community and the visitors that Main Street's still open for business. That's a key and important part of this for everyone.
Do both of you feel comfortable that now is the right time to go ahead on this project? I mean, there have been several delays over the past almost better part of 2 decades. To those who might say, well, right now business is in kind of a downturn period. Why don't we wait a little bit until the economy is a little bit better? Is that a good reason, do you think, in either of your minds for, waiting another year or 2 or 3?
Well, first I'd like to address the delays. The major delay has been self-imposed because we were ready to go with this project a few years ago, but decided that it would be a better project if we could address the utilities and move the overhead lines. So we put the project on the shelf for that 2-year period while we were exploring and developing the utility plan. So otherwise we would have a roundabout perhaps built by now. So, and we think that by waiting, it's created a better project. Who really knows when the right time is to have a project of this nature go forward? Some could argue that, well, the economy is poor, so let's wait until it's better. And others would say, well, now's the right time to do it because there's less traffic and it will impact us, in a better way. Others might say, well, if we wait till the economy's good, then no one's going to want to do it because we're too busy and we don't want to disrupt it. So what is the right answer? The right answer is to go forward when things are in place. And we have talked to some of the businesses in the area, especially those that are going to be directly impacted, like the Morrows, the Hands, Main Street folks. And I think there's a general consensus that let's get on with it, let's deal with the pain, because 2 years down the road, we'll all come out of this in a much better way. And if we meet it at the right way, and if the projections about the economy improving are on target 3 or 4 years out from now, then we will have a town center to be proud of, a welcoming environment for the increased traffic, and something that we could all say, boy, we're glad we did it when we did.
Got it over with and done.
Exactly.
Well, I guess that's where we're going to have to leave it for today. I think we're just about out of time. I guess folks will have an opportunity, though, to really sort of peer into this on August 17th, I believe. We're having a site visit there at the junction, and followed by a necessity hearing at the select board meeting that evening, Tuesday, August 17th, 7 p.m.
6 p.m. for the necessity hearing.
5 o'clock site visit, 6 o'clock necessity, 7 p.m. compensation with
Okay.
regard to one property.
So I guess folks will have an opportunity at that time to really get a close-up look at what's going on and what our projected timeline is like.
Right, the town's website will very shortly go live with a dedicated page for the roundabout. And of course, we have plans in the office that are always available.
All right.
Also, what people can do is they could see have a good idea of what the roundabout, both roundabouts will look like, because we do have renderings and photographic overlays.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here today and sharing your information with all of us. I know for everyone here in town, and even though for those living out of town, this is a big deal. And thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again the next time.